Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us bright and early for this very exciting session this morning. This session is the Green Grids Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid. Green Grids accelerators and the role of research regulators, parliamentarians, and civil society. This event has been organized by Climate Compatible Growth, CCG, and Climate Parliament. CCG is funded by the FCDO, UK's Foreign Commonwealth Development Office.
If you wish to ask a question at all throughout the event, please use Slido. The link is www.slido.com and the code is 2715656. There should be a link on YouTube, and also there are banners around the room for those in person. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the chair of today's session, Nick Dunlop, who is the Secretary General of Climate Parliament and also the Green Grids Initiative lead at Climate Parliament. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So you've just heard who I am. I'm a citizen of 3 countries, New Zealand, Ireland, and South Africa, though I don't live in any of them. I live in Brighton, not far from London. The dilemma, if you're a citizen of New Zealand, Ireland, and South Africa, has to do with rugby, because all 3 countries are kind of obsessed with the violent and primitive game of rugby, which doesn't say anything very good about the 3 cultures, but there it is. So they sort of battle it out in the Rugby World Cup, and I have to decide who I support. But since I was born and raised in New Zealand, and anyway, the All Blacks are the best team, I support them until they lose, and then I support whichever of the other 2 is winning. So now that we've cleared that up, I was just saying earlier that I'm very encouraged to find that we have an audience this morning, because this is quite early and everybody tends to burn the candle at both ends at a COP. But I wasn't worried, because we have such a wonderful panel that I figured we'd just have a round table discussion, even if nobody else was in the room. But anyway, thank you for coming. Now, our subject is the Green Grids Initiative - One Sun, One World, One Grid. And behind that hyphen, there hangs a tail, which we will come to. Behind both sides of the hyphen, the Green Grids Initiative and the slogan which was coined by the Prime Minister of India, One Sun, One World, One Grid. I'm proud to say you find, if you like what was her name in The Wizard of Oz, the little girl, Dorothy, thank you, Barry, I knew you'd know, who worked her way to the Emerald City and finally managed to get into the wizard's chambers. And then she did what she wasn't supposed to do, and she ripped aside the curtain to reveal who the wizard really was. Never mind if you don't know this story. And but basically, anything to do with green grids, One Sun, One World, One Grid, if you're looking into how it got going and you rip aside the curtain, you find an MP. So, and in particular, MPs who are sitting on chairs here right now. So we'll go into that. But this is a project that the Climate Parliament has been working on for years, and in which now the Climate Compatible Growth Program is heavily involved, and is one of the reasons we're able to continue working on it is that we're doing this work partly as part of the Climate Parliament's involvement as a member of the CCG consortium. For those not familiar with CCG, as you all know, the energy world is full of TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, and you have to, whenever we hire a new person in the Climate Parliament, we make them learn about 100 TLAs. But CCG, Climate Compatible Growth, is a consortium of universities, including very famous ones, Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial University, College London, Loughborough, KTH, the Swedish Royal Institute of Technology. And we will, on this Green Grids work, I hope, expand it to include other universities too. And the Climate Parliament is sort of the odd one out in the original CCG coalition, since we're not a famous university. But rather than me going on at length about what the Green Grids Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid is, this thing that was launched in a speech in Hindi delivered by the Prime Minister of India at the Glasgow Climate Summit, and then again a couple of days later in a ministerial launch event with ministers from not only India and the UK, but let me see if I remember, Australia, the United States, France, Nigeria, the Prime Minister of Samoa, and others have been involved as well. They were releasing a statement endorsed by 93 countries called the One Sun Declaration. I am now going to turn to the wonderful person on my left to explain what it is. The wonderful person on my left is Sergio Mesana, who is the Global Executive Director of the Climate Parliament. He is also a very highly regarded Chilean novelist. If any of you are Spanish-speaking, there's a big prize in Spanish literature called the Romulo Gallegos Prize. It's sort of the equivalent of the Booker Prize in English literature, and Sergio has been a finalist for it. The book that will win is the one yet to be written about a bunch of weirdos he got to know when he was working on climate change. So that's us. Sergio, take this microphone and explain what it is.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you to the Climate Compatible Growth Program for this invitation and for this space for conversation. I will say a few words as an introduction about the Green Grids Initiative - One Sun, One World, One Grid, before passing the floor to the other distinguished speakers. This originates in an intuition by the Climate Parliament that even though there are other very important dimensions of the climate issue, fossil fuels still remain the biggest source of the climate crisis, and the realization that even though the world is moving in the right direction on many fronts, including renewable energy, sustainable transport, and others, it is not doing it at the speed and scale necessary according to the scientific community to avoid a climate breakdown. And what we are facing is basically one of the biggest challenges to human organized life in history, to human civilization. So since there's been a spectacular growth of renewable energy, but that renewable energy is not replacing fossil fuels, which is what we need to do to stay within any kind of safe carbon budget. Starting from the realization that we are in this race and that speed and scale are so crucial, we have, this is not our idea, but we subscribe very strongly to the key concept that transmission is absolutely essential. And of course, even though probably the largest effort and investment would be on the generation side, massive generation of renewable energy, particularly in deserts and offshore wind, the transmission is a key enabler. So we thought a few years ago of establishing a coalition of governments, and we went around speaking with ministers of energy and environment about creating something called the Green Grids Initiative, which really got started. Even though we had interest and we organized a planning meeting in Mexico City a few years ago, hosted by the Mexican Minister of Energy. With the commitment by Prime Minister Modi of India to launch it at the COP last year in Glasgow, the involvement of the International Solar Alliance, and then very decisively of the UK government to lead to the launch in Glasgow of the Green Grids Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid, with a One Sun declaration that had been drafted in that meeting in Mexico, that has been subscribed right now by more than 90 countries. So now we have an ecosystem, a Green Grids Initiative ecosystem, coordinated and led by the UK government, of which the climate compatible growth plays a crucial role, and the Climate Parliament is very happy to support it. Working groups have been established to work in Africa, in Asia Pacific, and on finance. But then again, that's the moment that we are. So that's just very few brief words to provide a context. That's where we are. And again, thank you so much for the invitation. And we're really thrilled to be part of this collaboration and this very, very important work.
Great, thanks, Sergio. So Sergio alluded to what has come to be called as the Green Grids Initiative Ecosystem, which includes the coalition of governments that we have been assembling and the multilateral agencies who got very involved, who the British got very involved using their immense convening power as the COP presidency at COP26. When you're the COP president of one of the big climate summits, everybody comes to your meetings, and they did. Now, there's a small secretariat in the British government now with a few officials involved, based in the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and they're a secretariat for Green Grids Initiative and sort of act as a joint secretariat for Green Grids Initiative -OSOWOG, as it's called. Don't ask me why we call it OSOWOG. Not my favorite acronym, but the other half of the joint secretariat is the International Solar Alliance Secretariat in Delhi. But then beyond that, there's all the others who've got involved, and the person in the Secretariat, embedded among those British officials, but who's actually the program manager of the Climate Parliament, living in London, though she's from Lismore, New South Wales in Australia, which earlier this year was under 5 meters of water, is Lucy. And she has been given by the British officials, asked by the British officials, to be the coordinator of the Green Grids Initiative Ecosystem. And the reason they asked her is that they quickly realized that Lucy has magical powers, which have become legendary, to coordinate an infinite number of things and keep 10,000 balls in the air simultaneously without ever dropping one. And how she does this, nobody knows, but she does, and while she does it, she remains totally calm at all times and always delightful to work with. So if you want to, you can let us in on your secret, Lucy, but otherwise you can just talk about the Green Grids Initiative Ecosystem for a minute and enlighten us about that.
Thanks, Nick, for saying that online on a recorded session.
I hope your parents are watching.
No, I don't know. But no, thanks. It's really nice to be here. I remember almost exactly a year ago, we were sitting in Glasgow. Glasgow.
There
you go. Talking about the initiative and how it came to be after the launch, a few days before, in a ministerial meeting with some of our ministerial steering group members. We're all very tired, but it was a really, really great moment. And we were talking about what we're going to do next and putting a work program into place to really, achieve what we've said we were going to do. And really happy now to say that that's underway. So we have, I think I talked about last year, we had 3 working groups, 2 regional, so one in Africa, led by the African Development Bank and the African Union Commission, one in the Asia Pacific, led by UNSCAP, and another finance working group, at that time led by the GCF, but now really the engine room is CCG, and Abby, who's online, and Steve Pye, really driving forward the work program there. But so, since I'm not going to say Glasgow.
Well, if we put on our posh English accent, it would be Glasgow.
We met, the ecosystem came together in March for a meeting at Walton Park to really sort of knuckle down and see what we could do, what projects we were going to focus on, and it was quite a democratic process of choosing those. And then since then, we've established task forces behind those projects. So for the African working group, that the team decided to focus on the Zizabona line. So that's Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. So that's in this, obviously, part of the Southern African Power Pool, and they're now leading the task force to really push that project forward. And that's connecting with Mega Solar as well, because the project initially was not supposed to be, it's grid interconnection, but not having green electrons flow through those lines. So we're really trying to push forward for a new study to make sure Mega Solar is a huge part of that project. And we had a meeting a few days ago in Luxor where that hopefully, I think, took a few steps forward. The other project in that region is the Inga Dam, which is it's got quite a history, but we'll see what we can do with that as well. In Asia Pacific, that group, as I said, is led by UNESCAP, but with a lot of other regional institutions involved now as well. And they've got 3 projects they're really focusing on. One, which Cliff might talk about in a minute, looking at small island developing states and regulators there. It's really putting a knowledge-sharing platform together through the led by ESCAP and the RETA initiative, as well as a project taking the work that Steve and Abby and others have done in the finance working group, really trying to unlock climate finance for grids investments and applying it to a case study or 2 case studies in Laos to really see when it applies, and if not, what can be done to make sure these projects can access climate finance. And then the third is putting together a sort of guidance document for governments and other institutions on how to move forward large-scale grid interconnections. So it's looking at a life scale of what we call an interconnector in this way, and getting case studies behind those from the region and elsewhere. And that's progressing. That's led by ESCAP and Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department in the UK team, UK government and National Grid and others. So yeah, I'll stop there for a second. But it's really, we're really sort of leveraging the ecosystem that we've put together, and it's actually having some impact.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And in fact, we just had a meeting in Luxor over the last weekend where we had a very senior representative of the Green Climate Fund set up under the Paris Agreement to help fund climate work in developing countries as part of the 100 billion pledge that everybody knows about. And just at our meeting, he pretty much committed to put some serious money into some of these clean energy superhighways that we're working on. But now just to go back and forward in time in terms of the role of parliamentarians in this, because the role of parliamentarians has been very important in getting this underway and is going to continue to be indispensable to make sure that things happen as a result of all this work. Put it this way, I was 2 years before COP26, I was at a meeting at Wilton Park, which is an agency of the UK Foreign Office that organises high-level dialogues in a very beautiful, stately home in Sussex, not far from where I live. And at this meeting were some of the top officials in the Cabinet Office preparing for COP26. And they had had a letter that I wrote together with the then Director General of the International Solar Alliance in Delhi, Upendra Tripathi. They had a letter from the International Solar Alliance inviting Britain, this letter had gone to all member states of the ISA, inviting them to participate in a Green Grids Initiative launch in Glasgow. And they were kind of humming and hawing, and they were interested, but they couldn't quite decide. And I said to them at the end of the day in the bar, by the way, I've just heard that the Prime Minister of India is prepared to front this initiative in Glasgow, to be the spokesperson. And they said, we're in. And that was it. That was the thing that flipped it. No more messing around. The British COP presidency team took this on as one of the major outcomes beyond the negotiations that they were working on. Now, how did this happen? It goes back to about 2015 when Sanjay Jaiswal got the ball rolling with the Prime Minister of India Sanjay Jaiswal, and a group of other members of parliament at the time who co-signed a letter to the Prime Minister. So, Sanjay, please tell us a bit of history. What happened? What happened then? What did you do? What did the Prime Minister say, without revealing anything you shouldn't reveal? But I don't think he'd mind you revealing anything, because what he said was all good. And then what happened in terms of meetings with Indian ministers of power and so on? Just a few recollections, Sanjay.
Thank you, Nick. If you remember, in 2015, we all, members of parliament through Climate Parliament, met in Shanghai. And there I presented that Green Grid Alliance, where we thought that if the whole world connected with DC grids by 2050, it is doable, and then we can take care of our fossil fuel problems and all those carbon problems. And after that paper, I came back to India. I met our energy minister first and shown the chart and showed the whole map that how it is doable, and we can connect everything from Australia to America, and it's a doable thing. The first line he said was, "What you are talking about? We have been elected for 5 years, and you are talking about 2050. So I don't think so. It's good. If you have got any idea for 5 years how we can electrify the India or anything else, please tell me." So finally I returned from his office. After 4 or 5 days, I met Prime Minister. Again, I showed that map, and I showed that this is doable, and India can take a lead role because we are between it. And from Shenyang to Morocco, if there is one single grid, it's doable for all the 3 continents, and we can extend it to Australia and America even further, the way technologies are changing in DC grids. Prime Minister liked the idea, and he said, okay, I will see it. Within 24 hours, I got a call from my energy minister. Sanjay, you have shown some map. Please show me again what you want to say. And I was called there. I really got a VIP treatment with my energy minister. He listened everything peacefully. Then he said, yes, it's doable, and we should move ahead. We should move on the solar. And after 2 years, we saw that ISA was formed with France and India, Indian Solar Alliance. And it was an idea that all the countries who are living in between line of Capricorn and line of Cancer, if they all collect together, they all get interconnected grids, then it will be sufficient to supply the whole world through solar only. And that was the basic idea of ISA formation. And after 1 year of Nick's effort in England, then suddenly all these things came. Though India was invited, and we again there was a lot of things that should we, shouldn't we. And I'm thankful to Nick. He will always pursue me, go and meet Prime Minister, go and meet Energy Minister, and I tried my best what we can do. And then this OSOWOG, One Sun, One World, One Grid, and Green Grid Initiative was formed. And today, after 1 year, through us, we have decided that we will form a regional grid. All the countries are joining India. We met yesterday, and we have decided, and so many other countries, we are going to have a DC line for Gulf also, and Australia is making it to Singapore. So now I'm seeing that it can happen even before 2050. And it's all because of that climate parliament picture, which Nick, Sanjay, and everyone, Sumedha, Mukul, everyone they all tried to make it. And now that's a part of history, and I think we are going to see it in the near future.
Thanks, Sanjay. Now, members of parliament have a very important role to play in solving the climate problem because they have many powers. In addition to the magical ones, they get to make laws, they get to amend budgets, they oversee government departments through parliamentary committees. But one of the informal powers that members of parliament have that we have been using to the full in putting this initiative together is their access to the top levels. Not everybody can just walk in and see Prime Minister Modi when they feel like it. And the reason Sanjay can is that he is a very senior member of the governing party. He has been the chief whip. He's currently the president of the governing party in the state of Bihar, small state of 200 and something million people. But also, as you may be able to see, he's a very, very nice guy. And it's impossible not to like Sanjay, and I'm sure that the Prime Minister likes him as much as the rest of us do. So when Sanjay asks for a quick meeting with the Prime Minister, he gets it. And believe me, there are millions of people in India and around the world who would love to be in that position, but they aren't. Mr. Modi is not, I would say, the most accessible Prime Minister in the world. He likes to have time to concentrate on what he's doing. And so, you know, this parliamentary access has been a key part of the picture. Now, another member of Parliament who hobnobs with heads of government and has a long history on this issue of climate change is Barry, who himself was a Minister of Environment in the last Labour government. He was the world's first Minister of Biodiversity, and he became this by thinking up that title to add to his collection of titles. And Prime Minister Tony Blair thought it sounded good, so Barry became the world's first Minister of Biodiversity. Like Sanjay, Barry has played a key role in putting this together, not least when he braved COVID just as the pandemic was spreading and flew to Delhi in early 2020. But Barry, why don't you say a little bit about how the initiative evolved from your perspective and the role you played in it?
Nick, thanks. I think the first thing to say is that we as parliaments around the world have been focused on mitigation, not on adaptation. But in our focus on mitigation, we've looked at how we can transition through to renewables. But we've had very little focus on what we then do. And there is no transition to net zero without transmission. So no transition without transmission. And that is the key to understanding what it is that the Climate Parliament and everybody who's together here in the room have been trying to do. I managed at one particular point, when it appeared that things had gone slightly cold, to have a meeting with Narendra Modi, who I've known for about 25 years. Before he was actually a politician, I knew him. And he was a member of an official in his party, but he wasn't actually even the Chief Minister of Gujarat at that stage. And so I had a meeting with him in Delhi when I went there. Sanjay and I then went to have a meeting with the minister. But that was important in just sort of overcoming a glitch at that point, wasn't it, Sanjay? And obviously I also spoke with, I think, a succession of secretaries of state at Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK. But really, in that sense, I was no more than a messenger. I was taking the message and trying to make sure that we got on to the next stage. But I do think that parliamentarians increasingly must have a role, because we're not just behind on our commitment in terms of the NDCs that parliaments have actually signed up to. We're behind in every single aspect of this twin crisis, which is the crisis of climate change and environmental degradation. So this year, yes, we not only have COP27 here at Sharm, but we also have the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we must begin to see these two as tied together intimately, because if we're going to tackle this, it is about seeing it as a whole. We really have one problem in the world, and not two, not three. It's one problem. It's not desertification and biodiversity and climate change as separate conventions. They are one convention, really, and we have to address them as one and unify them. So those are the ways I think that now parliamentarians have to dig deep, and we have to address these problems and hold our governments to account. I'm a member of the opposition now in my own country, and we've had bipartisanship in the UK for a very long time. But there is a real need always to hold the government to account for going further, and when it's failing, to be clear about those failures. And I'm clear that for all that we've done in the UK, and we've done a great deal, but we still are not on track ourselves for net zero. Our Committee on Climate Change said that 61% of the targets that we have no clear plan to deliver those emissions reductions. 61% of the emissions reductions have no clear plan to deliver them. So there's a huge role for members of Parliament to actually drive forward the agenda. And I think that's what we all need to take into account as MPs. Thank you.
That is so right. Barry, who is also an exceptionally nice guy, which is part of his secret sauce that enables him to achieve so much, has way, way underrated his own role when he says, I was just a messenger. Or let us put it this way, you can be just a messenger, but whether your message is accepted by the Prime Minister of the world's largest democracy depends on whether the messenger is trusted. And Sanjay and Barry are trusted because they are honourable men. The Prime Minister knows very well that when they bring an idea to him, there's no second agenda, they're not trying to achieve, there's no hidden agenda, there's nothing else on the table. They're doing it because they want to help ensure a decent future for the world's children, and that gives them trust and credibility. And without them, we wouldn't be sitting here discussing this initiative. It's quite simple. And the other MPs have been involved. They played key roles, but Sanjay was at one point delivering a letter signed by 25 other Indian MPs from different political parties. So the Prime Minister's office already knew there was support and interest right across the spectrum in the Parliament of India in this. And that's, if you like, the climate parliament model, that we have our champions, like those sitting on here, who are active, who are playing a leadership role. And then we have a group of supporters who are active supporters, and then a wider circle. It's kind of concentric circles of people who are prepared to add their name to things and so on. And with that, just a small handful of champions in a few parliaments can achieve an extraordinary amount, and we've proved that time and time again. So another champion who's sitting before you is Sunita Duggal, an MP from Haryana state, who is one of those who doesn't just talk about climate change, but actually is prepared to give it time and invest real political capital. It's on MPs like these that the future of the world depends in a way, because they are the people, the politicians, the elected politicians, heads of government, some ministers, and members of parliament, are the only people who really have a mandate to transform the global energy system in time to prevent a climate catastrophe. They're the only people who really have a mandate to take the steps necessary to protect our last great forests and other ecosystems. And unless we get them more engaged in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, we are toast. The officials who circulate around in the COP do not have a mandate to do those things. They're not authorized to agree on a rapid transformation of the global energy system. Their governments would be shocked and horrified if they did in most cases. So it's only the politicians who in the end are going to make these decisions, and among those politicians we need the champions to take the lead because nobody else will. So Sunita, just if you would, share a few reflections based on your experience of how going forward MPs can help to make sure that we keep the pace up, that in the end Green Grid's infrastructure gets built.
Hello, I'm audible now. Thank you so very much, Nick. And actually, I'm not that much experienced as Barry and Sanjay is, and they have shown that what a member of parliament can do. I'm a first-time parliamentarian, but I'm really very privileged and lucky enough to be this member of this climate parliament. I just want to say that, I'm also lucky that I'm working under the able leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, who has given one sun, one world, one grid. I believe, we are attending this climate parliament in this COP27, being the part of climate parliament. From here, whatever we have gathered, we will disseminate it to the parliament and it to the constituency of ours. And I think it is a global platform. Then yesterday, we just talked about the South Asian, and after that, it is NDC. And again, I think you will ask what is the full form of NDC. And after that, from NDC to the state level that I represent, Haryana, being the only woman parliamentarian of that state. And after that to my constituency, and after that to the, a village. So in that way, you can see that how a member of parliament can work. So in the parliament, recently, we had a debate on the climate change. And across the party line, all the member of parliaments that participated. And our minister, he was bound to, he was accountable and he was bound to speak and say each and everything, whatever the other member of parliaments they have asked to him. So in that way, also being the member of the government, we are having, we have accessibility to our Honorable Prime Minister as well. So also in case we just talk about our constituency, there are so many things. We have a quarterly Disha meeting, that is how we, we inspect and we monitor the plans and the projects that central government is being projected, and the state government, they are given by the state governments, and they are all being inspected and monitored by the member of parliament. And also we have responsibility because we just act as a bridge or channel between the government and the people. So I think because we just represent India being the largest democracy, and we represent approx 2 million of people, and again you were saying and you were just encouraging us that yes, really we are powerful, we represent so many people over there. So they just listen to you when you just talk from the core of your heart and you say that this is all beneficial for you. They really listen to you. I think the human beings, we just claimed that this land is our own. We just show our ownership on this land. We show our ownership on the sky. We just show our ownership in the sea. But only the sun is left. So that's why this is given. That's one sun, one world, one grid. Nobody can claim that we have ownership on the sun. So I think from top to bottom, like from one human being to the world at large, we can just disseminate our thinking, and it is the time to pay back to the nature. As our Honorable Prime Minister has said, life, it is very important. Like one human being, what one human being is thinking about the nature, that lifestyle for environment. How many of us, we just switched off our lights when we just come out of our rooms? How many of us just think that we should not waste food in our plates? These are small, tiny things. I just believe that we should take care of so that we can save our nature, Earth. Thank you so very much.
thanks, Sunita, and thanks for all the work that you and your colleagues in the Parliament of India are doing on these issues. Just to add a little more about the role of parliamentarians in the future and pushing this agenda ahead, a lot of that work has to happen regionally because regionally is where most of the cross-border long-distance trading of renewable energy needs to happen in order to connect everybody to the best locations for wind and solar and hydropower, other renewable energy sources, but those are the big three in their region. There will also need to be, wherever appropriate, interregional connections too, so that we can link up more time zones and extend the length of the solar day for everybody, for example. But with renewable energy, you've got to harness it over a wide area, and this is one of the key thoughts behind the Green Grids Initiative. You know, in a single location, the wind comes and goes. You put up a single wind turbine, it stops and starts as the wind comes and goes. The sun rises and sets, so your solar panel's only working for maximum 8 hours a day, if you're lucky. And the rest of the time it's not. So it's only, if we're going to run the world on 100% clean energy, which the science is totally clear we have to do to stay within a carbon budget, because the carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere stays there for centuries, we have to stop emitting carbon dioxide almost completely. That means we have to run the whole world economy and generate enough energy to lift 4 billion people out of poverty with renewable energy. That means it has to be abundant, cheap, and reliable, available 24 hours a day, everywhere. And the only way you can do that is to think big, think beyond the nation state, and harness all the sources over wide areas. So as the wind moves around, you're still catching it. As the sun rises and sets, you're catching it where it's still up after it's set where you are, and so on. We're creating now a model for a regional parliamentary network focused on building that regional green grid. Where else to start doing that but South Asia? So Sumedha, do just say a word about the South Asia Regional Energy Parliamentary Network. I probably got the words wrong there, but go ahead.
Yeah, we're calling it South Asian Regional Parliamentary Forum, but it's something that's still under discussion, and we'll be getting more views on that from all parliamentarians involved in the South Asian region. So what we are trying to do essentially is sort of focus the green grids idea to the region, as you mentioned. And the South Asian region has been sort of engaged in energy cooperation through bilateral agreements, and now it is in discussions on trilateral agreements as well. But it has not been happening fast enough. And there are studies which have claimed that, which have established that if countries basically cooperate in very many ways, they will benefit, greatly. For instance, if a perfect market of sorts is established in the South Asian region, India can save almost 35 gigawatts of installed capacity, as in it wouldn't have to install that amount of capacity. So I think there are benefits for all the countries involved, if they cooperate on the different and varied resources, renewable energy resources that are there in the region. With Climate Parliament, we are trying to see how can we advance the conversation on this, particularly on the political side, because we are well aware that South Asia is not the easiest region in terms of the political relations. So we are trying to see how can we sort of get the political will going in a way that also delivers action. And we are trying to do this with the help of our parliamentarians, trying to sort of, have champions of this cause in all the countries. And then we'll sort of establish a forum which will then meet regularly to identify the bottlenecks, to then sort of talk to their respective national governments, push where a little bit of a shove is required, and basically get the agenda going. This is, of course, part of a very broad sort of set of things that need to be done to establish the South Asian regional cooperation on energy. That is, there needs to be a market, there needs to be a regulatory forum where they can coordinate their regulations as well as policies, and all the countries are very different in that sense. So we are trying to play sort of a coordinating role amongst all these components and getting them together and work fast enough to deliver South Asian energy cooperation.
Thanks, Sumedha. And just to say a word more about Sumedha, most members of parliament are like Sergio and me and Mukul Sharma, who's sitting here, our Asia director, who, by the way, dreamed up the name Green Grids Initiative, sitting on the terrace of a hotel on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland after one of our meetings. Mukul's good with words, because if you walk into his apartment in Delhi, his shelves are groaning under the weight of journalism awards that he won when he was a journalist some time ago. But we don't know the details of policy, so when we're trying to think about policy, we need someone who does know about policy. So we all do the same thing. We just ask Sumedha, who's been leading in the Climate Parliament on policy for many years now. Moving from South Asia to California, Cliff, it's very good that you are here. Thank you for being here. Just going back a little bit, Sergio mentioned that in 2018 we had a meeting that he largely organized, hosted by the Mexican energy minister in the old Senate building in Mexico City, in the room where they hung up the dead Emperor Maximilian by his feet. And the president of Mexico came in to check that he was dead. If you don't know the history of Mexico, you don't know what I'm talking about, but there was an attempt in the mid-19th century to install an Austrian prince as a new colonial emperor of Mexico. As you can gather from my story, it didn't work out well for the Austrian prince. But anyway, they've removed the body, and we had a meeting. That's not very funny, is it? We had a meeting in the room, and there were 19 governments represented there, and I use the word governments carefully because during this period, you may or may not remember, there was an unusual occupant of the White House in Washington. Sergio and I had been in meetings in the State Department about the idea of the Green Grids Initiative just before the election, where we all, like the rest of the world, thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president, and she wasn't. So thank you, President Putin, for the role you've played, if you're watching, in ensuring that. And what we did, what everybody did, we said, right, the US is kind of out of the game for the next 4 years. So we go to, I'm not going to say the next best thing, an even better thing, and that is the great state of California, which in its own right is one of the largest economies in the world. And before this meeting in Mexico, Sergio and I went to Sacramento, the state capital, and met with the commissioner in charge of renewable energy at that time, and told him what we were planning and that we had this meeting coming up in Mexico, and he very kindly said, we will be there. And California was at the table when we drafted the One Sun Declaration that was finally issued in Glasgow. So that means that Sergio and I know what it means to be a commissioner in the state of California. It means you're like a minister in one of the world's largest economies. You have immense power to shape events, not just in California, but around the world, because there are certain places that set the trend. We all know that. The fashion houses, the great fashion houses of Europe, have people on the beach in LA, Santa Monica Beach, checking what the kids are wearing, because they know that what the kids are wearing on LA Beach this year is what all the kids all around the world are going to be wearing next year, and they want to know. And it's a bit like that with energy policy. Often what California does first, other US states follow, and other countries pay close attention. So, Cliff, A word on looking ahead, the role of regulators, the role of people like yourself in enabling us to accelerate the construction of the new green grids powered by renewable energy, combined with putting solar panels on every rooftop, every suitable rooftop in the world, that we have to have in order to switch off fossil fuels in time. As one result of our preparation for COP26, the UK regulator, which is called Ofgem, convened a new association of regulators called RETA, the Regulatory Energy Transition, Accelerator, thank you, how could I forget? And Cliff, I believe you are now involved in that, so please say a few words about the absolutely critical role that's going to be played by regulators, including those taking a lead as part of RETA.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I don't have to stand for election, so that's the big difference between the role of regulators and parliamentarians. I'll say a word about California and the U.S., and then I'll talk about RETA and how it complements the Greening the Grid initiative. We in California like to think we punch above our weight, and the policies we set help influence the national and international discussion. We have very ambitious net zero goals, clean energy goals, and where we are right now is learning how difficult the implementation will be, how COVID and supply challenges have made things worse, but just the very nitty-gritty of getting transmission lines approved, getting generation projects interconnected, having the right workforce, the right policies in place as we transition and deal with intermittent resources is very challenging, even for a highly sophisticated economy and regulatory state like California. The good news in the U.S., in the context of what we're talking about here today, is transmission is really having a moment, and the federal agency that regulates transmission in the U.S., the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has undertaken a series of very interesting and important regulatory proceedings to accelerate, rationalize, streamline, and make more efficient transmission planning throughout the U.S. We're divided into basically 3 regional grids nationwide, and there's an effort to try to make planning within those large grids more efficient, and in some cases have planning between the grids. Ironically, I think in the West, where I am, we do not have a regional grid, and I think it may be harder sometimes to surmount the political differences we have in the West than in the European Union. It feels that way at times. But there's an imperative to do more, and I think we're really very engaged in that effort. The initiative that Nick mentioned, RETA, was launched by Ofgem last year at the COP, and it came from the realization that there is not just a very strong need to rapidly decarbonize, but that implementation is going to be key, that many jurisdictions are experiencing very similar challenges, and that there's a real gap between leading jurisdictions and those that are still developing their clean energy policies. And it's intended, as I say, as a very nice complement to the Greening the Grid initiative. It's intended as a platform for both national and subnational governments to exchange experiences, best practices for accelerating decarbonization. A very strong focus on having an inclusive, just transition, promoting regional cooperation and technical assistance, as we just heard about. There are now close to 30 regulatory bodies around the world that are part of it. We've gotten funding and support from IRENA, the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, nonprofits, and NGOs in the United States. The process by which we work is to have both workshops, bespoke technical assistance, and peer-to-peer exchanges. I think the peer-to-peer exchanges is something we really want to emphasize, having matching regulators from different jurisdictions with different levels of sophistication and knowledge. Our first three efforts are focused on one, small island developing states. Secondly, principles of interconnection, as we've talked about here before, and how that can promote higher uptakes of renewables. And then a real implementation question is discussions about how decarbonization factors into the day-to-day decisions of regulatory officials. How do you make it work in practice? We want to create a knowledge hub as well. So we're very ambitious. There's an event later next week here at the COP. We're encouraging other regulators to join, and hopefully it can be an important complement to the Greening the Grid initiative.
A most important complement, and you know, one of the fascinating things is you get something like this going, the Green Grids Initiative, and all sorts of unexpected things happen. And that's what's been happening in RETA, which in itself is an extremely important initiative, getting together the powerful regulators who create the framework within which the private sector operates in each country, state, region. You know, getting them together to accelerate the energy transition is itself, it could be the most important thing we've achieved. Who knows? Who knows? Depends how hard you guys work. It's a competition. So, but you're competing with MPs, of course, and they're tough competitors. I hope you all clocked what Sunita said just in passing, that an Indian MP on average represents 2 million people. Sunita and Sanjay, between them, represent pretty close to the population of my country, New Zealand. That does not mean that India could beat New Zealand at rugby. Fortunately, we'll never know because they have the good sense to play cricket instead. But you know, there's just an indication of the power that members of parliament bring to this. So, you know, they represent the people of the world. One MP representing 2 million people weighs heavily in the world compared to most of us. Now, let us open this up. I'm going to look at this iPad in a minute, if I can get it going again, where some people may... Oh, Abi, sorry, yes. But I'll warn Jakob that I'm going to call on him first, because we have an audience here that contains as much expertise as is on the panel, if not more so, because Jakob, thinking of Jakob in this regard, reminds me of a comment that President Kennedy made when he invited all the Nobel laureates of America to dinner in the White House. He said, this is possibly the greatest assemblage of intellectual voltage ever brought together in the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined here alone. That is something you could say about Jakob. He probably knows as much about energy policy as all of us put together. He's a professor of the subject at University College London. He's a lead author of every IPCC report ever produced. So get ready, Jakob. So, Abi, now let's come to the role of CCG in this, which has already been a very important role. CCG, Climate Compatible Growth, the consortium of universities, brings together some of the world's leading energy modelers and other experts on energy policy, etc. This group is led and coordinated by Mark Howells, another person here who knows as much as the rest of us put together, who is himself one of the world's leading energy modelers, originally from South Africa, now based at both Imperial College and Loughborough University in the UK. Previous to that, he was a professor in the same field at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. So I think Abi was at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden at one time. Abi is one of those leading energy modelers, and he has been providing invaluable insights through modeling done by the team for two of the most interesting and promising clean energy superhighways, as we like to call them. A phrase that we got from one of our American colleagues. Americans are very good at sort of slightly using language that slightly exaggerates for impact. It's not for nothing that Madison Avenue is the heart of the global advertising industry. But two of the leading sort of candidates for clean energy superhighways that could connect huge numbers of people to huge renewable resources are linking India to the Gulf nations across the Arabian Sea with undersea cables. And another one that's already been mentioned, I think, is linking the deserts that form the western half of southern Africa to the people who live mostly in the eastern half of southern Africa, where the big cities are. And on both these things, Mark and Abi and the team have been already putting numbers to it, and that helps to make it real for both governments and potential private investors. So, Abi, say a bit about the work that you've been doing and leading on this.
Thanks a lot, Nick. And good morning, everyone. My name is Abhishek Shivakumar, and I work as a researcher in the Climate Compatible Growth Project. And as Nick mentioned, the work I've been mainly involved in is to provide research support to the GGI-OSOWOG initiative. I'll be very brief. I guess all I'll focus on is what we found when we were discussing the modeling of grids is that grids in themselves aren't sources of emissions. They don't absorb or emit emissions themselves, but rather a potential enablers for emission reductions. So the first question from a modeling point of view is how to estimate what those potential emission reductions could be. So in order to do this, we found that an energy systems model probably has an important role to play. So we've been putting together an energy system model generator, pretty much, so that we'd not just be able to focus on one region or country, but quickly carry out an assessment for any region in the world. So we came up with this energy model generator called Osmosis Global. So it's an open source, open data energy system model generator that was recently published. And we've been applying this to different case studies. The two that Nick mentioned are the ones that we focused on so far. So one is an interconnector between the Western regional grid in India to Oman to connect the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And we were trying to identify whether, from a techno-economic point of view, whether this would make sense. And what we found was that in a majority of cases, it would make sense. And what needs to be sorted out are the financial arrangements itself. So from a kind of system point of view, it makes a lot of sense to put that interconnector in place. But from an investor point of view, in that interconnector, you would still need to come up with a financial arrangement that made sense. And more recently, we've been looking at the Zizabona interconnector in Southern Africa. So that's a set of 3 interconnectors between Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, and Botswana. And here our focus was really applying the climate finance eligibility criteria to find out whether the Zizabona would qualify for climate finance, and we were able to confirm that it would indeed be almost entirely eligible for climate finance. And in the process, we showed how Osmosis Global can be used potentially as a screening tool for climate finance institutions and multilateral lateral banks. So yeah, I'll stop there so that we can have the rest of the panel.
All right. Well, thank you, Abi. And I just say again that although energy modelers and professors do not have the power or mandate to change the energy system, only the politicians have that. And even the regulators who have the power to change the energy system, they can't do it if the politicians aren't ready for them to do it. But the professors and the energy modelers can play a very big role in illuminating what that transition looks like and how to make it happen. So, the role that CCG is playing needs to be expanded in this, and we're constantly looking. If any funders are listening, we're constantly looking for more funds, for more modeling, more research. And actually, at this moment, we have some promising leads, but I won't go into that. So I just want to alert the MPs here that we have some questions coming in from someone who very, very understandably is defined here as anonymous. It almost looks to me like this is an MP asking the questions, but I'm gonna tell you. Perhaps it's one of you just sitting there, sort of doing it on the just in the background. But I'll just mention a couple of the questions that have been posed here, so you can think about it. Because after Jakob, I'm going to turn to you and let you respond. How do MPs get a clear map of who finances what to access the funds and to ensure this gets to people justly? What information do MPs need to get excited and engaged, to have an impact on their constituency and governments? What tools are most needed by MPs to take the agenda further? I'm giving you a flavor here. Power lines cross states. How would MPs recommend conversations across states? And on grids, social, cheaper power for people and more jobs, and two, great economics, cheaper power equals more GDP equals more jobs. Is this what you communicate, and how do you communicate it? Now, of course, I've already answered all these questions because the answer is very simple. The MPs just ask Sumedha. But beyond that, perhaps the MPs could reflect on these questions. And if you want, I can go over them again later. But to give you time to reflect, Jakob, please give us your reflections. Share with us anything printable that's going through your mind at this moment.
Well, thank you, Nick. And I've just been listening to, to this conversation, and also how, feeling like how the moment has changed in the sense that, let's say 10 years ago, we were talking about a very different type of an energy future. And what I find quite interesting, of course, is that, yes, a lot of it is to do with the price of renewables has come down, and that has had a major kind of knock-on effect or a disruptive effect on even how we are thinking. I mean, the idea of an interconnection, running from east to west would have been a pipe dream, say, let's say 10 years ago. The idea of clean cooking using electricity would have been a pipe dream 10 years ago. And I think, we've come that far in the sense that we are thinking in a very transformative way, largely because of the possibilities of technology and prices and so forth. So I think it's a moment to be able to harness some of those opportunities. And I think, a lot of the discussion that we've seen very much reflects on it. I mean, a lot of the work that I do is, of course, on Africa, and this is a region which is still struggling with the whole energy access question, and I think I know that, Nick, that your thinking, of course, goes beyond one separate region, but rather to interconnect different regions and be able to create the possibilities for cross-regional, cross-continental type of thinking. But at the same time, I think the other side of me also says, well, yes, this is true, but a lot of the challenges that we're faced are in rural areas, let's say. If you're looking at the energy access question in challenge in Africa, the urban areas are very easy to be able to deal with. The real challenge is in rural areas where you have sparse populations spread across. And I think, and of course, the off-grid approach is something that is being discussed. Now the question is, how do we capture some of that, on that smaller scale, but at the same time of, this larger scale as well? How do we reconcile some of these scales that we are talking about? And I think, this is where my thinking is. I'm very much inspired by this conversation, by a lot of the work that CCG is doing. At the same time, also feeling like, there is this other side which still needs attention. And of course, we also need to think about, how does that get accommodated in our larger scale, continental, global type of energy system that we're trying to build. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Jakob. And I should mention that we have in the room 3 of the professors who form the heart and the sort of management founding group of CCG. There's Mark Howells, there's Jakob Mulugeta, and there's Ed Brown sitting behind him, who also... Steffi, right? Sorry, hidden behind Jakob is Steffi. So we've got quite a lot of the powers that be in this very powerful university consortium. Now, we're running out of time. There's only going to be time for one set of final remarks from any of the panelists. So if anybody else wants to share a reflection or pose a question to any of the brilliant people in this room, I'm going to put this iPad down now. There's no more time for online questions. Would anyone else like to come in? Okay. What a useless audience. There we are. See?
No, I'm even more useless because I'm going to copy whoever the MP was that was asking those questions. And quite seriously, what are the sort of toolkits that are going to be useful to help create a transparent discussion amongst yourselves and other MPs, but also as you engage with constituencies and governments? So what tools are most needed? Thank you.
Mark is not useless. I am always awestruck by the amount, I'm sure all of us who work with him are, by the amount of projects he generates, by his incredible output. He's a one-man campaign to save the planet. So let's just go very quickly down the line, bearing in mind that some of the panelists have to be at a very, very important meeting in the COP not long from now, and we don't have our passes yet, so we're not going to let this meeting run over. And just any final thoughts that have come to you based on, starting with you, Sergio, based on what he says, do it to the MPs. You see, here's one of Latin America's most highly regarded authors, a professor himself of Spanish literature at one of the world's most famous universities, Stanford University, and he thinks he's so unimportant he has nothing to say. Say something, Sergio. I don't care what.
I noticed that Barry has writing some notes, and so I think we should hear from the MPs.
Your questioner asked about finance, tools, cross-border, and presentation. On finance, I think the key thing is that the private sector will finance this, but in order to do so, they need certainty from government. That means they need to know that there's a contract at the end of it. They'll be able to get the investment as long as they know that there's a contract at the end of it. Preferably, I would say a contract, a feed-in tariff, something like that, so they know that the revenue stream is there. That has to be guaranteed by government, and they have to be confident that the government will stick by what it says. And that's where political risk comes in. That's why it really is essential that as members of parliament, we work on a bipartisan or multi-partisan basis to ensure that the government, when it's making that commitment, can give that confidence to industry, because they know that even if the other side gets in next time, they're likely to pursue exactly the same strategy, and it's been supported bipartisan. On tools, look, really important, because part of the problem with all of this is that we don't have the skills skills base very often to deliver the targets that we've set. If one simply looks at something like electric vehicles, well, how many car mechanics are trained up in servicing electric vehicles? That's a very simple analogy. How many, in the UK, I would say, how many gas fitters are trained up in hydrogen? So we actually need to look at the skills base that we need, and as politicians, that's our job. We have to make sure that we're working with the further education institutes, that we're ensuring that those people who are going to be able to deliver this technology, the engineers, are actually grown, there, educated, and ready. On presentation, it was an interesting question. Look, this is about how we communicate with our constituents. It is about how we communicate with the public. And unless people see that this is a fair, equitable, and just transition, it is not going to happen. And that means you need to create the new jobs before you get rid of the old ones. Because no representative of a workforce is going to say, yeah, you can just abolish my jobs, unless they see that there are better jobs, better paid jobs to move on to. And that's why the way in which we present this has got to not be about, you've got to save the planet. It's got to be about, this is a fantastic opportunity for economic growth that is clean, that is going to save money in our health service, that's going to actually improve the lives of people, and it's going to give ordinary working people the jobs that they need and our economy the boost that it needs. So I think it's really important, that question that came in about presentation. And I also think we need, to think about how we connect the small scale with the large scale. And that's where something like the Clean Cooking Initiative in Africa and parts of Asia, where people are reliant on charcoal and wood fuel, spending hours every day, women spending hours every day going to collect the wood or the charcoal to make sure that they can cook a meal. This is a huge waste of labor. And what we've got to be able to persuade people is that actually, if you free women up from that by a local mini-grid, and then you connect that local grid, ultimately you can grow that so that people see that this is part of the way in which clean energy is delivered, but it's got all these co-benefits. It's got the co-benefits of health, that children and women aren't breathing in those fumes. It's got the benefits of freeing up labor so that women aren't spending 6 hours a day going and collecting the fuel. And of course, it's also got benefits in terms of equality and the status of women. Really, really important that we connect the small scale with the large scale when we're presenting this. The most difficult one of all, I think, is cross-border security. And I think it's the most difficult one of all because of what's happened in Ukraine. The world has seen that energy can be used as a weapon. And it's waking up to the fact that not only energy, but food is used as a weapon. And what we're talking about is openness. What we're talking about is moving to a world where people are prepared to exchange and trade energy because it's in all of our interests. And I think the political situation has dramatically changed with the invasion of Ukraine. And I think the job of us as politicians is actually to recreate that dialogue, recreate that openness with our immediate neighbors, certainly, but on a regional basis. Because unless we can trust one another, unless as governments we are prepared to say, yes, we will be open and exchange with each other, then there will be no transition because there will be no transmission. And here I think the regulators have a huge role to play as well, because you're from California. I remember, as you will certainly do, the blackouts in California under Gray Davis and the inability to connect with local other states. And America dominated by individual grids that don't talk to each other. We have to be able to ensure that the grids talk to each other. But we've got a job as politicians, just as you have as regulators. Thank you.
So MP's toolkit for finances for doing good to their people or to their estate, there are 4 mainly toolkits. First, you have to look very carefully to the budget. And whatever the government gives to your estate and to your constituency, you have to claim that it's you who has persuaded the government and you have got all these things. The second alternate thing is that we raise the questions in Parliament, and the minister says, yes, we see that it's done. And most of the time, the minister will say that, I will look into the matter. They will never say that you are wrong, I will not do this work. So once he commits, I will look into the matter, then we start pursuing it, that you have promised in the Parliament, you will look into the matter, so you have to do it. The third tool is standing committees. We have got our friends in all the standing committees. The area of our interest, we pursue the members. We also become the members of the standing committees, which area of our interest is. Otherwise, if we want something for our state or for our people, we'll pursue the member of parliaments who are in that standing committee to get the budgetary recommendations for our area. And fourth is at personal level, meet minister, that is very important and you have to do it, whether it's a national issue, international issue, or a local issue. We meet the ministers and we pursue them. Most of the time we succeed. If we don't succeed, we can go to the higher authorities. Otherwise, if it's not doable, then if they convince us that it's not doable, then it's fine. Otherwise, we pursue them till we get it.
I wanted to follow up on the question about presentation and also follow up on what Barry said. I wanted to make 2 points. One, increasingly, I think it's important for us to communicate that the transition is necessary not just for climate purposes, but also to ensure reliability. I'll give you an example from our California experience. We're already seeing the ravages of climate change much more quickly than we thought. The past few years, we've seen impacts to our hydro resources from the drought, fires on our transmission lines, growing load because of high heat, and impacts on our thermal load because of high heat, leading to poor performance. So we need to modernize the grid. We need to have the regional interconnections that Barry mentioned. We need to have expanded distribution resources, not just for climate purposes, but to ensure that reliable resources continue to be delivered to customers. Secondly, there's fascinating research that people may have seen about the strength of the learning curve for wind, solar, batteries, and electrolyzers, showing that those are very, very well defined. And increasingly, we should be talking about renewables not just being cheaper than we thought, as Jakob pointed out, but cheaper than business as usual. And the faster we accelerate, the more rapidly we move up the learning curve. So the faster we accelerate, the cheaper things will be. And that's a very important message I think we need to deliver.
I think member of parliaments, they have all the time, to keep on convincing either the people of their constituency or to the government. Like in case if off-grid, energy is generated by the people in the agriculture sector, or then it is really very beneficial for the constituency, and that we have to convince them that it is good for you, and they can also store some energy, and they can also sell that to the mini grids. So in that way, they can also earn the money, and also they can utilize that energy which they have generated on their own. In that way, government is providing subsidies also, and this biomass gasification is also being encouraged in the village level. And to the government, we just keep on convincing them that the projects, the plans government is, they are giving, they are very helpful for so they should give the money for these projects to the state governments or to the member of parliaments. That's
I think I'll respond on 2 fronts. One is the tools that are required for MPs and also the energy cooperation. I'll come to that later. But of course, tools for MPs, the MPs know best, so I'll leave it to them. But from my experience of working with MPs for so many years, I feel that they don't need tools, they need an entire ecosystem to really work towards their constituency on this front. They don't just need, so MPs essentially have to act like parents for their constituents, because climate change is not an issue that a lot of constituents are facing on a daily basis. So it's not an issue that gets to the MP as an urgent matter on a daily basis. It's something that the MPs need to foresee as a danger, as a risk for their constituents, and then sort of act upon that. It's a very difficult area to work on. We've, at Climate Parliament, we have experimented with websites, toolkits, knowledge documents, or research support, everything. But ultimately, a lot of that needs to come together in a sustained manner for the MPs to hold their attention on this area. And there, I think we'll also need to focus on how and it's sort of a long shot, but we also need to focus our attention on how the democratic processes in each of the countries are developing and how MPs are felt important in the entire policy-making process in the first place. So in addition to helping the MPs on a point-to-point basis, I think our research and studies and advocacy should also focus on how do we influence the national government to encourage include more democratic processes in their policy-making. And that was on the toolkit part. On the energy cooperation, and I strongly feel about this, that at the moment, I feel in the last few days that I've been talking about energy cooperation, or I've been listening to a lot of people talking about energy cooperation, it has been sort of limited to electricity being transferred from one country to the other, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of market, establishment and institution establishment. But I think energy cooperation could possibly have a broader scope than that, a broader framework where we could look at technology cooperation, development cooperation, as well as R&D cooperation, capacity building cooperation. And I think that could really deliver a lot particularly on the local scale, where we look at potentially models being exchanged. That has been tried, though, but more on the regional scale. Even suppliers being sort of set up, supplying institutions being set up so that low cost can be achieved for the region as a whole, and things like that. So we need to have a broader conversation than just the grid infrastructure or the market infrastructure.
Great, thanks to everyone.
And Nick, also, we have a CSR, that is corporate social responsibility. The corporate sector, they have to spend 2% of their profits. So in that way also, the MPs, if they can just convince them again, so they can spend some money in their constituencies. Thank you.
Great. Now, these final comments have been so brilliant that they have inspired Professor Mesana to make a final comment himself, which is good because Sergio is very good at the efficient wrap-up. So there you are, Sergio.
Yes, I wanted to just very quickly second some words by Jakob and by Barry, in the sense that even though adaptation is absolutely crucial and transmission is necessary for mitigation, and taking into consideration that we are on a path to destruction. Some intellectuals in the US are even using the term omnicide, which is similar to genocide, but it means the death of everybody. Some studies say that at the current levels of heating toward the end of this century, the Earth would have a carrying capacity of about 20% of the expected human population. So we're talking about devastation at a level that it has never been seen before in history. But having said that, Jakob and Barry were emphasizing that adaptation, as we traverse our path from now to then, hopefully not to that bad worst case scenario, adaptation has a key role to play, and that was included in the One Sun Declaration, emphasizing grids for that are able to integrate electric vehicles and also, of course, mini grids for productive uses, for clean cooking, integrating, of course, the crucial gender dimension in many areas of the world, energy efficiency, etc. But at the same time, the key message is without the transmission, that adaptation in the end would futile in opposing this potential catastrophic scenario that we're facing if we don't do this difficult but absolutely necessary task of advancing on transmission. But I'll let Nick say the final word.
Okay, thanks, Sergio. Thanks to everyone for a really good conversation. I may have mentioned rugby already. You're probably getting the picture that New Zealanders are rather obsessed with this, but it's not our only obsession. We're also obsessed with water sports. In the big event in Olympic rowing, the eights in the last Olympics, the British and the Americans and the Germans fought it out for silver and bronze. And in the America's Cup, which is the World Cup of sailing, the British and Americans and Italians, Sergio is also Italian, I say it with surprise, came to New Zealand during the pandemic to fight it out for the America's Cup. And the Italians knocked out the British and the Americans and made it through to the final. But New Zealanders weren't worried. There's a point that I'm making here, and it's not just to demonstrate the insufferable arrogance of New Zealanders about their sporting prowess. It's, though I have demonstrated that, I know. It's, the point is that there's not even 5 million New Zealanders. And when they're up against the Italians and the British and the Americans and the Germans and the Indians in cricket and so on, it never occurs to them that this could be a problem, that it's a bit of a nerve for little tiny New Zealand, which would simply get lost in Mumbai, to take on giant India. And usually we lose, but not always. My point is, those of us involved in this Green Grids Initiative ecosystem are few in number. We have few resources. You know, we're taking on, in a way, like a lot of other people who are here in Sharm this week, we're taking on the immense combined power of the global fossil fuel industry, which has an annual revenue of $5 trillion a year. They only need a tiny sliver of that to buy enough politicians to block real progress on climate change, and they've been doing it ever since the Climate Convention was signed 30 years ago, and that's why we're seeing disasters breaking out all over the planet. We're just a little band of people who think we can make a difference. Never doubt that we can, we are, and we can. And they'd better watch out, because soon they will be on the dust heap of history. So with that, I will end this meeting and we'll all rush back to the COP. Thank you very much, and thanks to CCG for putting it on.
Thanks again to our amazing speakers and Nick for chairing the session.